Great to be here. I would love to say it's great to see all of you, but all we see are black boxes with your names. But we will imagine your faces. And Ted and I are delighted to be here tonight.
Yeah, likewise. Emily and I have been working together for, I guess, about 3 years. This center used to be down in the St. Paul campus in the Twin Cities, and was founded in 1994 by our co-worker, Dr. Mark Umbright. And as he's moving now into semi-retirement, we repositioned the base of the center here at UMD. And some of the work we do is we help restorative justice programs get this program development supports they need. We do training work, some research, and now and then we actually do some practitioner work. And that's mostly what we want to talk about this evening as an introduction is what does restorative dialogue look like? What is it geared for? Who are the appropriate participants in a process? So we hope this can be good learning, and we really want there to be discussion and questions too within the hour.
One of the things that Ted and I are both really passionate about is that restorative thinking and practices are really everyday practices for everyday people. People don't have to be professionals to think restoratively and to act restoratively. And that's a little bit of the flavor of what we're going to bring tonight.
And I like to think that one of the key defining features of restorative justice is the whole idea of connecting people. If you think about communication as being understood in terms of walls and bridges, there's no shortage of examples of walls that are built up in our society, whether it's around political or social conversations, whether it's a workplace conflict where you're in dispute with someone, or an actual crime where victims and offenders by the traditional system are kept apart with big walls of protection. And frankly, restorative justice is all about creating safe zones to connect people through peacemaking conversation where there can be deep dialogue, deep listening, people can be deeply heard. And what we've found in this work is that people's needs are truly met. They really do feel satisfied. They're thankful that they can have those heart-to-heart conversations. And it's just a real privilege to be in a field that has so many wide applications.
Okay, Ted, should we start our short PowerPoint?
Sure. I'm going to go ahead and do a screen share and just take about 5 minutes to go through some basic introductory things. So bear with me while I connect this up. How's that looking there? Okay. Lots of concepts. Restorative justice has been around for about 40 years in North America in its current forms, but behind that, indigenous societies, tribal communities have really been doing this kind of work for centuries. If you think about an indigenous community where there's harming and harmed people, they have to coexist. And so community forms of justice are very ancient. And in many ways, the modern movement of restorative justice is aligned very well with those tribal ways of going about doing things. There's a wide range of restorative justice in the last decades. This is from South Africa. The second person there from the left is Desmond Tutu, who was one of the main architects of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. In the mid-90s, when apartheid was breaking down, a whole process that was restorative in nature. It allowed for truth-telling and amends making, deep harms, and somehow the whole society was able to come together and vicariously benefit from that. So that's restorative justice at a very high scale, but the same principles of conversation, truth-telling, deep listening, making amends, learning can happen in a school setting with a circle process like this. Somewhere between those two ends of a continuum is the opportunity for victimized and offending parties to come together. This is Joe Barry and Patrick McGee of Ireland. And years back, Patrick was known as the Brighton bomber. He literally placed a bomb in a hotel that had diplomats and dignitaries in England. And Joe Barry's father was one of the many who were killed in that bombing. Years later, when restorative justice started to take root in Ireland, they had facilitated conversation to come together. And since that moment, they've actually become friends and they go on speaking tours together. So what really are these common elements that hold all of these conversations in that big range that I just portrayed to you? There's dialogue, there's listening, there's trust building, ownership, empathy, reparation. This is all what I call the furniture of restorative dialogue. And if you think about these, they're not real typical for courtrooms. Even though courtrooms have communication, courtrooms have listening, they aren't really known for trust building. But one of the key things is that restorative dialogue opens up communication rather than restricts it. When people come together and offenders can have ownership, both parties can have empathy for each other's experience, and there can be reparation agreed out of that. This is what really allows people to feel like they're getting a deeper experience of justice. Our traditional justice system draws from this symbol of Lady Justice. This is throughout all Western justice, you know, the statue and the pictures everywhere. Three symbols of scales, blindfold, and sword are always accompanying this image. And they represent what I call values of our traditional system: fairness, equity, reason, objectivity. These are all good values. Restorative justice is not trying to denigrate them or displace them. It's just recognizing that there's some deeper values around human needs and relationships that are sometimes missed by these. And so these symbols of the scale, the sword, and the blindfold can lead to a limited focus on law. They can create an oppositional setting, like it's a contest, and justice is reduced to the concept of punishment rather than giving something positive and life-giving back to the community. How about this for a different image? Here we have Lady Justice sitting right there. Her symbols are still in the room. They're there in case they're needed. But now the center of gravity is around conversation, listening, people being heard, folks understanding each other at a deeper level. Now we have a new set of values: relationship, respect, responsibility. These provide sort of a compass, and there are many different models of dialogue, but these values that are very central will make sure that any kind of restorative work is staying true to its vision. We often hear politicians talk about being hard on crime, and usually what they mean is, you know, a high sentence of accountability, low support. And the opposite of this is soft on crime, where you have low accountability and high support. Usually you don't hear politicians saying we need to be softer on crime, because if the debate is framed by these two options, the only positive option is to be hard on crime. But there's a fallacy with this framing, and that is that accountability and support somehow can only be an inverse relation to each other. Why not have them both go up? This is smart on crime. This is the essence of restorative work, where you hold people accountable for their actions and dignify them so that they feel like they have motivation and genuine, authentic reason to make things right. In this context, accountability is now taking positive responsibility to apologize, make amends, give back, rather than just take more pain unto yourself. So if I had to summarize restorative justice based on some of these principles I'm already talking about, I would boil it down to: it addresses and repairs harms, and it engages and empowers people. It's really that simple. It's going to focus more on the harm rather than the law broken, and it's going to engage those who are most involved in a harm or crime rather than just leaving it to professionals. And once you combine these two, you're going into this communication process zone that helps people to connect with each other, move forward in life, rather than justice kind of holding people back to the past. We want justice to move people forward. And that's when shift happens. That's kind of my favorite bumper sticker line. When people have deep heart-to-heart conversation, they connect with each other, shift happens, and new futures open up. Oh, we'll come back to that there. So again, we certainly really invite questions that can be chatted, but I'm going to turn it over to Emily. It's always good to kind of ground this work in actual stories. So I'll turn the talking piece back to you, Emily.
Thanks, Ted. So now that we just introduced some basic principles and core values of thinking restoratively, we thought about a case example that we would bring to get your own minds running on that restorative track. And the case example that I'm going to share with you now is one that our criminal justice system would generally categorize as a hate crime. And of course, we chose this because of all of the important, profound national conversations happening right now about race in America. So both Ted and I have helped facilitate restorative dialogues after hate crimes have occurred. And the one I'm going to share with you is a story of an elderly Black couple in a kind of mid-sized southwestern town in the United States. And I've called them Joseph and Helen for our purposes here. So Joseph had a serious medical condition that necessitated that they leave their home for several weeks, where he was in the hospital undergoing surgery and then recovering. And in the meantime, their home was lying vacant, not really people checking on it. And when Helen returned home, Joseph was still in the hospital, she came home hoping, I'm sure, for a little sense of ease, checking on things, getting some new supplies, and then she was going to head back to the hospital. And what she found was a completely trashed house. So while they were gone, 5 local boys, they were between the ages of 12 and 17. They had broken into the house. All the boys were white. Later, it was found that a couple of the older boys had urged the younger boys to participate in it. The 2 older boys were trying to gain favor with a local white supremacist gang that they had been, older men in the community had recruited them into. So those 5 white boys not only trashed the house and spent a lot of days in there partying, but they left behind really specific symbols, including a burned crucifix and a Confederate flag. So that's what Helen came home to. What happened in the case was that the boys were caught. They confessed. And here's where I would say, what I want to pose for you is there are kind of three fundamental questions that our traditional criminal legal system asks after a harm like this takes place. And those questions are, what laws have been broken? Who did it? And the third one is, what did they deserve? So if we just lean into those three questions for a moment, the three questions of the traditional criminal legal system after this case that I've just described to you are, what are the laws that were broken? Who did it? And what did they deserve? Leaves a lot unfinished. And here we want to contrast to the three questions that restorative justice tends to lean toward. And these have been articulated in a very nice fashion by Howard Zehr. And Ted's putting that up on the screen for you right now. Who's been hurt? What are their needs? And whose obligations are these? So when we think back to what I just described, Joseph and Helen undergoing an already scary, traumatic thing with Joseph's health, Helen coming home to the house that's not only trashed, but also with really painful and scary symbols of racial hatred and bigotry. The boys are caught and confess. They do a little time in the juvenile detention center. They're admitting, at least the older ones, that this was part of white supremacy aspirations. And the conference that came as a result was after the boys had done their time in juvenile detention, Helen requested to meet with them, and the boys agreed. And what followed was a meeting between those boys, Helen's daughter. Joseph's health was still too precarious to participate. And then, I don't know if I said this, but some of the boys' parents were involved as well. And then two restorative facilitators, so I was one of them. So before I tell you what actually happened in that conference, I just want you to be able to lean in now to those three questions that Howard Zehr has articulated for us, those three restorative questions. And since we have quite a few folks with us here on our talk, which is awesome, I think maybe what I'll invite you to do is throw a few answers in the chat, because that would probably be the most efficient way for us to be able to see what your responses to this are. So you've heard me describe the situation. I'm going to give you the first, oh there we go, that'll work too, great. So if we just take up the first question here, the first restorative question, who's been hurt in this situation? All right, so now I'm going to invite you to go to town on that chat. Who's been hurt? And we'll allow for about a minute just to allow. Thanks, Pamela. She's got us started. We've got Joseph and Helen. Anybody else hurt in this situation? Thanks, Catherine. The community. Community, the family, the kids who did it. Yeah, the family of Joseph and Helen. Mm-hmm. Kids' families. That's very common. When the direct people who do harm, the stigma that attaches to their family as well. Mm-hmm. If we had to dig down, or as we say, peel the onion down a little bit, let's dig into one of the things I see repeatedly in the chat of community. When we say who has been hurt in the community, what do we mean? Just lean into that for another minute. Who in the community? We could even get specific if you could. Yep. Yes. So here we go. Yeah, that's right. It's great. One of the really important pieces of why a lot of folks working in restorative justice see it as very appropriate in response to this kind of harm that the legal system calls the hate crime is that this goes well beyond Joseph and Helen, well beyond the boys, well beyond their families. It's the neighbors. It's when somebody is targeted because of something about their identity, everyone who shares that identity category is now affected. Black community members, people of color, people from marginalized communities. I love the community ethos. You know, that's, I like that. So now I want to move us into the next question, which is when we think about how would we answer the question of what are the needs of all these folks that we've named here who have been hurt in this incident? Now this could go in a number of directions. So we'll just spend a minute on it just to get a little flavor of what we're talking about here. What are the needs of the people who have been hurt? What do they need? And while you're doing that, I'm going to close my office door so that you don't hear my yowling cat. Sorry, these are the Zoom days, right? Okay. Yeah, I'm just going to start naming these. These are great. Thanks, everybody. Trust, sense of safety, acknowledgement. Absolutely. A way to express pain and outrage, security, a voice. Absolutely. We could see that these needs are not going to be necessarily addressed in a typical kind of criminal legal proceeding. And where I want to go here is to suggest that in the context of this restorative meeting, what we see is that the needs of folks, I mean, why would Helen want to meet with these young boys? For her, her needs were not met, not all of her needs were met by the punishment that they were given by the court system. There was some accountability there, and that was certainly important to her. But to be able to have a voice and have a say, one of the things that the Norwegian criminologist Nils Christie said, who wrote about restorative justice, was that the state steals our conflicts from us. That the state steals our conflicts from us. And that means that those of us who have been harmed have no opportunity to even say what we needed or how we were hurt. All of that is kind of swept under, and it's the state versus so-and-so. And that leaves a big hole in a lot of people's lives. And then when we go to this third question, whose obligations are these needs? Now, we've got an obvious one, so we don't have to go there, but we could name it. The boys who did it, it's their obligation. Let's just take 30 seconds and throw this one in the chat. Whose obligations are it to meet the needs that you all have named here? To try to do something to try to repair the harm, to make sense out of it, to create some accountability and safety. Who's obligated? Who could help? Community leaders, the community, yeah. RJ is very based in the community. And here, you know, just to wrap up this part of a discussion, think about, is the problem of a white supremacist gang and racism in society the problem of 5 kids? I mean, they're implicated it. They're swimming around in the ideas of white supremacy, but it didn't start there. So thinking broadly about, as a community, how did we help create the situation? How can we help do something to dismantle it and to repair and move in a direction? Who can help Helen and Joseph feel safe? Who could take some responsibility to address what's going on with these kids? What about the family members? Where are the neighbors? So in essence, I would say that part of what we're talking about here is when we expand the pool of thinking of how to address the repairing of harm after crime, we have a lot more resources and tools to work with than only the hammer of the criminal legal system. And I'm seeing a question in the chat. Economic disparity may be foundational. Who changes that? And I would, thank you, excellent question. In some sense, I feel like where I want to go with that, and I'm just going to say a transformative kind of justice, which can partner with restorative justice, I feel like is called for there. And we could say more about that later, but that's part of where I would go, where I would lean with that question. Thank you for that one. Where we want to move back to now is we're going to change this slide and head into a small exercise that Ted's going to lead.
All right, thanks, Emily. And I think this is going to be just really short, but one way to kind of connect what we've just done by thinking about what are the needs that harmed people have, we can bring that a little closer to home and just think of a time where you had a heart-to-heart conversation, one-on-one, with maybe a family member, a friend, a coworker. Maybe it's a situation where you wanted to have a heart-to-heart conversation, but it could never happen. And as a result, you've been kind of left with that yucky feeling that resolution never really came about, or there's some distance or alienation or strain you have with that other person. Just take a moment and think about, what did you need in order for that situation to come out better? What did you need to receive in order to feel like you could move on in life a little better from that situation? And if you want to chat in, kind of like you've been doing, 1 or 2 words, keep it really short, go ahead and just add a few more in. Sense of security, understanding of the hurt caused, understanding. Another way to frame that would be to be heard, acknowledgement, apology. Wanted them to know that I'm sorry. Very nice. Sometimes in this exercise, when people are really jarred with something, they might need answers, or they might need to make sense out of something. Sometimes people will use the word validation. I just need to be validated for what I experienced. I wasn't crazy. Where I'm kind of going with this exercise is that we all have these basic needs that come out of harming situations or conflict situations. And if you take one thing away from this evening, here's what I suggest you take. Restorative dialogue with good facilitation holds space in which all of those kinds of needs can be met. Facilitators hold space for people for hard and healing conversations so that those needs that you're naming can genuinely have a chance to be met, and so you can kind of move on forward. And so these conversations are geared to help people to connect, to shift. And amazingly, this can happen at the level of a severe crime or murder in a post-sentencing context. It can happen with a fourth grader who has a 5-minute conversation with a teacher, and everything in between. And so I think we really want to open it up here for more conversation and get you to ask some questions. You're very welcome to open up your video screens if you want, but you don't have to. So you can verbally ask a question, or you can chat a question, or a comment. This is really wide open, and I think we have a good 20-25 minutes here to have some deeper conversation. Let's start with this. Of what you've already been hearing in this kind of appetizer version of an introduction, what's standing out to you in your learning? What's grabbing your attention that seems kind of new and helpful?
And Ted, I'll jump in here for just a second and say that I think now would be a good time. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording and again, yeah, just invite everybody, if you feel comfortable, turn on your video, unmute yourself, whatever you'd like to do here. I'm going to go ahead and stop this.